should be asking what two attorneys, one from Brazil, another from USA, are doing here. And this question is good because we came here to bring a different perspective about high-rise buildings. And the idea is just to discuss and not to explore all the legal issues that are related to this kind of construction, especially because there are several issues that we have to stay here for the whole day speaking, and I'm not sure that you're going to like to hear us the whole day. So we're starting just to give you a little bit about an overview about what are these issues and the main issues that we, from the Brazilian perspective and the US perspective, think that we should bring to you. And we'd like you to please participate also in your speech so we can have a more active presentation. So
there we are.
Yeah.
We were already introduced, so we can skip past this. Thank you for coming. I wanted to add as well, and as Victor said, there's so much expertise in the room already in your own fields, and we thought it could be interesting, hopefully, to talk about how the lawyers that get involved in construction projects and tall building projects, what are some of the concerns that we see, and what do we think you have to worry about, and what can happen when things don't go well. That's what the law is here for.
So first, we are giving a little introduction to our speech, and we would like to just start talking about the verticalization and what was the impact of verticalization on the legal issues. And so basically, what we see from the past years is that there are in some cities around the world there's a massive verticalization and urbanization coming, and this brought a lot of conflicts and a lot of issues to be dealt by the law. So in different countries, these issues were treated differently, and so right now we are going to talk a little bit about these issues. And
yep. The one thing that strikes me about this slide, I know there are people from all over the world here. As an American, the only building on this list, number 9, is this Willis Tower now. All the other buildings are outside of the U.S., and the U.S. has a very sort of well-developed legal system that's been involved with tall buildings since their sort of inception. So I think one of the things we're going to try to talk about today is what other legal systems need to include that the U.S. maybe already has, because it has the history that other countries haven't had the opportunity for yet.
So this is a good question. Verticalization is good or bad? So for us, from the legal perspective, verticalization, depending on how the country is prepared or the city is prepared to receive this verticalization, this is a good thing. But if the country or the city is not prepared and the public authorities doesn't have the means to control or even to regulate this verticalization, this can create several problems to the city and several problems also to the occupants of these buildings. So this figure is just to show what are the numbers for the next years. Especially here there are some numbers from that show that in the next few years, especially in China, we will have an increase in the number of tall buildings, and showing that will be a huge impact in some of the major cities here. These also show the significant increase on the tall building constructions. That these numbers show that we have to deal with these issues beforehand, especially in the planning phase, so we are prepared to deal with the problems that may arise.
One of the other themes we'll mention a few times as we talk is the bigger the building, the bigger the impact. on the neighbors, on the occupants, on society, on the city that they're in, if they're in a city. So as these numbers climb, and these slides are showing that the numbers are going to climb substantially, there's going to be an impact on the neighborhoods that may not have a tall building in them, and the laws that pertain to that are what we're here to talk about today.
So basically, our presentation will deal with these 4 major issues that arise from this type of construction. So we have divided ownership. So what are the issues that arise from having several occupants in the same building, especially when you're talking about the mixed-use real estate properties, and also issues regarding aviation, which are a big issue if we consider that we are talking about several meters tall buildings, and this may affect the safety of airplanes, and especially when you're dealing with properties nearby airports. Impacts on neighbors. This is also an issue, especially when you see a building that can affect the ventilation and light of several other properties in the neighborhood. And also the social problems. So what are the issues that the tall buildings can cause, and how the legal system can deal with these problems. So here is just to give an example of a current tall building that is being built in Brazil. Brazil is not a good example of tall buildings, but there's a reason for that. And the reason, this is something that we're going to discuss in this presentation, but mostly is because we don't have a good infrastructure, and the good infrastructure is the basic need for a tall building to be built in a country. On the other hand, we have the U.S. perspective, and this is an example of country or city which has good infrastructure to receive this type of real estate development.
Yeah, you can think about an infrastructure that's physical and supports the people coming and going to these buildings, and you can also think about an infrastructure of the legal laws, the laws that people rely on to make sure their investment in their own home is safe, and to make sure that if you think you have been disadvantaged by something your neighbor built, you have a right to make your claim that you have been wronged by the building that was built.
So the first issue that we will discuss is the divided ownership, and I will pass the wording to Arthur.
Sure. In the old days, it was easy to buy property and keep track of who owns what and know what you own. Now, it's more difficult when you have a building. Let's say you buy a condominium unit and it's 50 meters in the air, and you own a share, maybe 1/100th, 1/200th of the facade of the building, and you have the right to use a parking space. Well, that's all taken for granted when you buy a place like this, but the law can't still be stuck on this. It was very easy back then to say, I own lot number 9 and the buildings that are on it, and it's my responsibility to take care of the buildings. When you are in this situation, you have to have the laws changed and updated to make sure that your investment is safe, and unless you are going to pay cash for your house, I wouldn't not be able to do that. The bank wants to make sure that what they're giving you money, loaning you money to buy, is something that they still have the right someday to take if you stop paying them. So all of this is necessary before a condominium tower could be built, because the people who are buying it and the banks that are helping people buy it rely on the laws that protect your ownership of property in order to make it trustworthy and to make it feasible to buy a property that's no longer this. So that's the point. Property law must keep up with the new developments. If your laws don't cover how the assessments will be allocated and that there will be a board that is elected to distribute the money and spend it on common expenses, why would anyone ever pay in to a nebulous board they have no influence over? You have to have a system that people trust and rely on, or else the building will not be successful. This is a short history of the United States development of the law. Very first examples were in New York City, and they stayed there basically because that was the only place where these tall buildings with common ownership and more than one owner were being built, and they had cooperatives, they called them. They were essentially companies, and that wasn't very well suited for the way that people think about owning their home, that you would actually own a share of the company, and that gave you a right to live in the company's building. It was not quite right. In 1958, the first real condominium act was passed in Puerto Rico, and 12 years later, every state had one, and that is the law that covers the ability to own a part of a building and still have that same rights as you would have to a farm or a single-family home. And the same thing, it covers the establishment of a condominium board that manages the maintenance and the assessments and the costs of the building that are shared amongst the occupants.
In Brazil, we have, when we are talking about property and condominium rules, we have two different scenarios. One in which the laws that deals with how the condominiums, what are the limits regarding the condominium rules, but mostly what rules the condominium and the relationship between the occupants are actually private document called condominium covenants, in which you have all the specifications and how the payments should be done of the quotas and what are the obligations of the manager of the condominium and how the people should relate to each other in the condominium relationships. So basically, we have the civil code and also these condominium rules ruling all these issues. And we have, as I was discussing with Arthur before, we have some different issues in US and in Brazil. And in Brazil, for example, we have a new trend in the condominium, especially when in the mixed-use condominiums, in which you have service providers providing all types of services to the condominium, and this is not included in the condominium quota. Is a different payment that you do. Is like a pay-per-use service in which you can choose what type of service you would like to use, and maybe the other condominium, the other people that are occupants do not intend to use it. So you pay it for what you really want to have. Is an interesting trend that is becoming more common in the condominiums in Brazil.
There's something I forgot to say on this slide, and I think if I were out there, I'd be wondering, why does it say horizontal property? It refers to, at that time, they thought of slicing a building with horizontal slices and saying, you own this slice, you own this slice, you own this slice. I didn't want to go past that and leave people confused. Why would it be called the Horizontal Property Act? We're talking about vertical property, right? So that's all we wanted to say about divided ownership, and that's an example of something that maybe the architects and the engineers and the other operations folks that are at this conference don't think so much about, because it's taken for granted where you are, and you rely on it naturally. But there are places maybe where the law is not so well developed, and that's what we're trying to talk about today: is what laws are really relied on by the tall building occupants and neighbors. And neighbors are the next topic. what rights do you have when, say, a factory next door to you is built and suddenly the air is filled with smoke or odors or noise? Even if you have a nice, peaceful, quiet house and they build an auto racing track next door, you would say, I'm being interfered with. So this is really where the law comes in. Future cities, sustainable vertical urbanism. To be sustainable, you need to have harmony. And that's what we called our talk today, high-rise harmony. And the law is there. That's the purpose of the law, is to resolve conflicts between people, really at its heart. So you're going to get conflicts as the density of the cities increases. And I think everyone here knows that whatever graph you want to look at, whatever statistic you want to cite, density is happening and increasing everywhere in the world. And again, the laws have to keep up and have to give people rights that they expect they need to be fairly addressed and fairly allocated. This is just an example of, like I said earlier, an outsized influence. The bigger the building, the bigger the impact on the neighborhood. This is the Empire State Building casting a shadow that could be almost a mile away, maybe not quite a mile, half a mile away. And all these buildings next to it it's just a visual representation of the impact that a very large structure can have on the neighborhood it's built in. There's two ways that the impact of a building is addressed and mitigated and resolved. The first, any issues you can anticipate, more traffic, a shadow being cast, that's dealt with through the permit process. The city must issue a permit to allow you to build your building. Well, they're going to look at what kind of impacts it will have on the surrounding neighborhood. And you go through this process to address this to the satisfaction of the government in most places, and that's how it's resolved. But what happens when you have an unanticipated impact on the neighbors? This is a picture I took in London earlier this year. This building was constructed with a curved facade that unfortunately focused the light of the sun many blocks away, and it was I believe it damaged a car or something. So they've had to put up this black screen temporarily to resolve it. And the point is, what rights do the neighbors have if they think that they have been adversely impacted by a building and it was an unanticipated impact? This is where we'll get a little bit into the legal lingo. Hopefully we don't bore anyone too much, but this is really why I wanted to involve Victor and myself both. Why are there two of us up here? There's two major legal systems in the world, civil law and common law. And we'll get through this quickly, so bear with us. Common law is what we have in the United States, and we have it in England. The law evolves over time. If you felt that you were suffering a substantial and unreasonable interference with your land, then you take your claim to court, and what you do is you look at past rulings and past decisions that say a nuisance occurs when maybe you use examples from the past. They would say a shadow has never been seen as a nuisance before, so your case does not have merit. But the light focusing on a car, that would be seen as maybe a substantial and unreasonable interference, and then it would be deemed a nuisance. Civil law works different.
Yeah. In the civil law, everything, as you see, everything that is not forbidden by the administrative laws can be built. So the rules has to be very detailed, and this creates a monster, really, because the administrative law has to be updated every time in order to foresee what are the problems, what are the real trends that are going on, the real problems that are faced by this type of construction. So this creates several rules and laws every year, and this creates a monster, really.
Yeah, there are pros and cons to each. Under common law, the system evolves naturally. As new problems arise, you look at the old examples and you adapt. Civil law, like you said, you have to write down everything in elaborate detail, or else the legal system is unable to help you. The con of common law is people think it gives, there's plenty of people who complain that there are too many claims, there's too much litigation, because you can always sort of concoct an argument that the law should be extended to cover my claim. So, pros and cons. There's no right answer, certainly, but there's difference around the world in the way the legal system is even established and run. Talk briefly about aviation and the rules that apply to buildings that might impact the operation of aircraft.
Yeah, in Brazil, aviation is ruled by federal laws, and despite they are very clear on what are the issues that should be avoided, where a building can be built, and what are the highest, the tallest building that can be built near an airport, there are still several issues that are not controlled, especially when you see a social movement against some constructions. So an example of this was this building built in São Paulo, where I live, and this had a big conflict over this construction that struggled for 15 years, and nobody could occupy this for 15 years after several discussions. And this just shows that even though we have clear rules and it's stated in a code, this doesn't avoid these kind of problems.
Right, and as Victor said, the rules need to be clear, and this is taken from the United States rules that cover this. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, prepared this diagram to show you in great detail what areas have certain rules applying to them. As you see at the very bottom of the screen, it says the runway center line. So within 10,000 feet, within 50,000 feet, up to a certain height, there are rules that apply whether you can't build or you have to have lighting to protect against, to show the pilots where the building is. So the point is, really, you need the rules to be clear. You can't have a nebulous set of requirements that apply for this. If people know what the rules are, they can adapt their plans to meet them. If they don't, that's the problem, is you can't rely on the laws or you're not sure what they are. That's a problem. You can't do that.
And the last issue that we're going to talk about is the social problems created by this type of real estate developments.
Yeah, this is a building, set of buildings in Chicago, and this is a very different type of legal problem. This doesn't pertain so much to construction and use of the buildings by the owner. It has to do with buildings that weren't successful. This is the intersection of law, politics, and society. So in the 60s, and not just in Chicago, in lots of places, the idea was to build high-rise buildings to provide housing for those who can't afford it themselves. The problem was that this unfortunately caused a concentration of crime as well. So you had a really difficult law enforcement problem created by these, and they all had to be torn down. Demolition completed in 2007 of this particular project. I think it's safe to say it was a failed experiment, or a failed goal to build high-rise buildings to provide what they thought was very helpful. Another example is in South Africa. They built this high-rise building, but the local community could not support it. There was no demand for the units, and people moved in and without paying, and it was sort of taken over. And so the building, this is another example of when the building cannot be supported by the society and the social issues that arise from it.
Here's also another example of how two different countries and two different cities deal with these social issues. And here is a good example of why it's important to have a good infrastructure in order to have this type of development. So this is Shanghai, and this is Rio de Janeiro, that show two different realities. In Rio, the verticalization was not planned, And so the social problems were created. We have huge traffic problems and huge social issues in relation to this type of construction. It's the same in São Paulo, of which there was no planning, no infrastructure. So right now, the new laws restrict a lot the construction of new buildings in São Paulo, for example. It's very difficult to have a permit to build a type of development like that.
That's all we wanted to cover today. I hope we had, we raised some interesting issues, talk about things from a different point of view than maybe you've heard before. That was our goal today, and I hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor and Arthur.